Lucky Day. Alpha Mated Book 3, A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Written by Mac Flynn. 1. It was like fate had challenged my life to give me a hell of a workout, and my life accepted the challenge by placing me in a hamster wheel that was hooked up to the engine of a hot rod. This Monday would be no different, as I was soon to find out. First, however, I had to escape the amorous clutches of my werewolf mate. It was early Monday morning when I slipped out of the bed we shared in his large room, and tiptoed to the walk-in closet. A few moments later, I was dressed in a simple pair of dress pants and a blouse. I paused in front of a full-length mirror to admire myself. The mirror reflected most of the room, including the bed. The lump beneath the covers shifted as David sat up. His matted hair was becomingly flopped over his bleary eyes, and he was naked but for the sheets that pooled around his waist. I stopped my preening to admire his muscled physique. David ran a hand through his hair before his tired eyes fell on me. He arched an eyebrow. "What are you doing up this early?" I smoothed my shirt and turned to him. "You have any idea what day it is?" He shrugged. "A weekday." I picked up my purse that sat atop the nearby vanity, and walked over to the door. "Exactly, and that's why I'm going to work." He straightened and his eyes widened. "Work? Why?" I grabbed the knob and sighed. "Because that's what working people do." He leapt from the bed and strode over to me. I averted my eyes from his assets before I decided to utilize them. "Seriously? I thought you were joking about that whole working thing." I glanced over my shoulder and frowned. "Listen, I've been through a bunch of weirdness, courtesy of your life. Now I'd like a little bit of normal, courtesy of mine." He grasped my upper arms and slyly smiled at me. "But there are much more fun things we could do during the day." I snorted. "I also need a vacation from your libido before it puts me into traction." His face fell. My conviction almost melted beneath those puppy dog eyes. Almost. I half turned to him and cupped his cheek in one hand. "Come on, don't be like that. I'll be back before you know it, and then we'll have our bedtime together." I patted him on the head, and hurried from the room before he could convince me otherwise. Pure met me at the front door. In one hand were my car keys. He held them out to me and smiled. "At your early rising, I thought perhaps you might need these," he commented. I returned the smile and took the keys. "Thanks." I strode past him and into the cool grey morning. My car sat in the driveway close to the front door, and I drove down the drive to the main street. In a few minutes I was in the business district, just 6 blocks from where I worked. That was where a line of cars greeted me. I leaned my head out the window, but the traffic was backed up beyond my line of sight. A few horns honked but nobody moved. I shivered at the chill and rolled my window up. After 5 minutes the line hadn't moved an inch. I leaned back and threw my arms up. Perfect. I left a warm bed and lover just so I could drive all the way out here to get fired. A rap on the window made me jump. I whipped my head to the door window. My eyes fell on a ruffled boy with a floppy cloth hat and dirty overcoat. I couldn't see his face because he held his head down, but he was short and his stench wafted through the shut window. He held up a squeegee and cloth. "Want a cleaning?" I shrugged and gestured to the windshield. "Get at it." He held out his well-manicured palm. $5 before I get started." I rolled my eyes but took my purse in my lap and dug through for some change. "I've got a couple of ones." He nodded. "That'll work, just roll down the window." I rolled down the window and held out the cash. The boy lifted his head and I saw him flash a grin. He raised the squeegee level with the open window and sprayed an ample amount of the liquid in my face. "Hey! What the hell was that?" I clutched my head as the world began to spin. The waif reached in and unlocked my door. I grabbed their hand as it lay over the lock, but my grip wasn't strong enough to hold them. I could barely keep my eyes open as they opened the door and scooted me into the front passenger seat. The intruder tossed their tools into the back seat and turned the car into a nearby alley on the right. I tried to lift my arms to grab them, but my limbs wouldn't respond. The waif's eyes flickered to me. Just relax. You can't win against that stuff. My mouth flopped open like a gasping fish. The world around me darkened. My head lolled back and I lost consciousness. 2. My alarm sounded funny. Wake up already, a voice snapped. My eyes fluttered open. I found myself seated in a hard, armless wooden chair. My ankles were tied together with rope, as were my wrists behind my back. I appeared to be seated in a large abandoned factory. The room stretched for 50 yards on either side of me and 50 yards wide. The walls were sheets of steel and the floor was cracked concrete. A few evenly spaced square pane windows high up on the walls let in enough light for me to know it was still morning. The only entrances were 2 doors placed on opposite sides of the building, along the short walls. The only other furniture in the dusty place was a matching chair and table. The waif sat in the chair opposite me and some 6 feet away. Their cap lay on the table. Long brown hair spilled down the back and narrowed eyes stared back at me. I blinked at her. You're a woman. She smirked. Clever disguise, wasn't it? The woman pulled off the worn jacket and tossed that onto the table. Her pants soon joined her, and she stood before me in a black leather outfit that sat snug against her curves. A small leather jacket finished the ensemble. She was on the good side of 30, but just barely. Her skin was pale but not unhealthy, and when she walked her boots clacked against the concrete floor as she stalked around me. I turned my head left and right to follow her. Why the hell did you kidnap me? She paused beside me on my right and sneered down at me. You know why you're here. I rolled my eyes. How many questions do I have to ask before you believe I don't know anything? You know David Dives? I narrowed my eyes. What about him? The woman walked past me and plopped herself into the chair. She leaned one arm over the back and sat at an angle. Good, you admit it. I would have shown you the pictures I took of you this morning, if you would have refused. I arched an eyebrow. What pictures? She smirked and reached onto the table where a few photos sat on the table. The woman tossed them at my feet. I looked down and saw they were of my car leaving the front gates that morning. I snorted and my eyes flickered up to her. You still use film? The woman frowned. That's not important. What is important is that I stop both of you from hurting more people. I blinked at her. Come again. She leapt to her feet and clenched her fists at her sides. Her eyes flashed with fury. Don't start acting stupid now. I know you're in league with that demon. I stiffened. What demon? The woman slammed her palms on the seat on either side of my legs and stuck her face in mine. I leaned back and felt the front legs of the chair tip off the ground. Her breath was awful, and her clenched teeth were in need of dental care. You will tell me where you have taken those girls, or I swear to God I will. A terrific crash above us interrupted her ungodly threat. We both whipped our heads back and stared at the ceiling. The woman straightened and stepped back. Her lack of weight on the chair meant I lost my balance. I yelped as the chair fell back and carried me with it. We both clattered to the floor and my own weight pinned my hands between the wood back and the hard concrete floor. I looked to the gaping woman. A little help here. Her eyes narrowed. She reached back and brushed aside her short coat to reveal a holster. In the holster was a small pistol that she removed and clutched in one hand. Her eyes never left the ceiling. There came another clanging noise. Rivets appeared in one of the panels. The rivets flexed, and my eyes widened when I realized the rivets were really long, sharp claws. The fingers gripped a steel roof panel and tore it away from the building. Light poured into the dingy place, and a furry head stuck through the opening.
"David!" I shouted.
He was transformed into his werewolf self. Those bright yellow eyes swept over the building. They softened on me, but hardened when they fell on the woman. The woman clasped her weapon in both hands above her head, and pointed the barrel at David.
"Come on, monster," she yelled. "Come down and fight like the dog you are."
David curled his lips back and snarled at her. He dove headfirst through the hole of his own making and slammed down on all fours. His heavy, sharp claws dug deep into the concrete and cracked the hard material. The woman fired off a shot.
He dodged to the side. They played that game again and again, neither one getting any closer to the other.
I wiggled in my bindings. The rope didn't loosen, but the position of the chair meant I slid down the back, until my arms slipped out the back and pressed against me.
I flopped onto my side and used the chair to climb to my feet. The woman had her back to me. I hopped over and slammed my shoulder into her back.
She and I crashed to the ground. I couldn't grab her, but I wiggled all over her. Somehow her gun got loose from her hands and slid away from us. She grabbed my shoulders and shoved me off.
"Traitor!
Monster lover," she snapped.
I sat up and glared at her. "What the hell is your problem?"
David stalked between us. He faced the woman and turned his short, bushy tail in my direction. I couldn't see his face, but I saw the woman's.
Her eyes were as large as saucers, and she cringed away from him.
She covered her upper body with one arm and defiantly glared at David. "Do your worst," she dared him.
I heard him snarl. "David!" I shouted. He took a step towards her.
His clawed hand grabbed her by the collar and lifted her off the floor.
"David!"
The only reply I received was a tail in the face. I growled and bit down hard on the furry limb. Turns out werewolf tails are pretty sensitive. David yelped and dropped his prey.
He spun around.
My grip was strong, and he ended up dragging me into the woman.
She shoved me away. "Stay off me, you traitor to your own kind." "You're welcome," I snapped back.
I wiggled my chafed wrists and ankles. David glanced over his shoulder and snarled at us.
"Less snarling and more getting me out of these things."
David paused and blinked at me. A teeth-filled grin slipped onto his wide lips. I was glad when he partially reverted back to his human self. He still had some sharp teeth and claws, but there was less bite to his bark. My mate sheepishly smiled at me.
"Sorry about that. I guess I lost myself when I found your scent in here." I twisted around to show him my bound wrists. "No kidding, but could you get these things off?"
David stooped. The woman beside me scuttled away. He cut away the ropes and I pulled my arms forward and rubbed my raw wrists. My eyes flickered to the woman.
She sat on her butt and glared at us. "Do your worst, you monsters."
"We know," I finished for her.
I stood and put my hands on my hips. "What the hell's your problem anyway?
Why'd you kidnap me?" David stepped up beside me and chuckled.
"It's because Latro has a special spot in hell picked out for me. Isn't that what you always say?" "And it's the truth," she snapped.
I looked from the woman to David and pointed at the stranger.
"Latro."
As in the hunter who was bothering that paranormal dealer. David nodded.
"The very one." I glanced back at the scowling woman. "Latro's a woman. So what if I am?" Latro challenged me. I shrugged and folded my arms. "I guess it makes sense. You sounded like a pretty stubborn person."
She scrambled to her feet and clenched her hands into fists at her sides.
"I'm dedicated," she argued. I held up my hands. "All right, you're dedicated, but do you have to be dedicated to kidnapping me just to get at David?"
David looked to Latro and arched an eyebrow.
"Why have you been so persistent in tracking me?" She sneered at him. "Don't play stupid with me." I snorted. "He's not playing."
David's face fell as his eyes fell on me.
Whose side are you on? The side that gets me out of this mess, I quipped. Latro stomped her foot on the hard floor. Enough.
She reached behind her other side and pulled out a smaller pistol hidden in a second holster. I raised my hands, but David frowned at her.
Tell me where you've taken the women, and I'll think about sparing your woman.
3. David blinked at her.
Women.
I whipped my head to him and my eyebrows crashed down.
What women? He shrugged. I have no idea. He looked to Latro. Who do you say I've taken? Latro furrowed her brow. The women from the bars.
I crossed my arms over my chest and glared at David.
Bars. He held up his hands and took a step back.
Believe me, I have no idea what she's talking about.
Latro lowered her gun a little and arched her eyebrow a lot. The women who have disappeared from the bars the past 2 months.
David shook his head.
Doesn't ring a bell. Latro dug into her pocket and pulled out a sandwich bag. She tossed the bag at him, and it fluttered to his feet. Does that ring a bell? He stooped and picked up the bag. I slid up to him, and we both looked over the contents. It was a tuft of brown curly hair. Hair, I guessed. Werewolf hair, Latro replied.
I blinked at David.
Your hair's curly. He shrugged.
Beneath the overlay of werewolf fur, it is rather curly. His eyes flickered to Latro.
But only when I'm transformed.
Otherwise this happens. He handed the bag to me, and reached up and sliced off a small bit of his long hair. The fur shriveled and reverted to his dark short human hair. He opened his fingers and let the hair flutter to the ground, and then he tossed the bag back to her.
So if you're thinking this is mine, it isn't. She frowned and raised the gun. I analyzed that hair myself. It doesn't react well to silver. He raised an eyebrow. How does it react to silver? She pursed her lips. It does things to it.
David frowned.
What does what to what? Latro half turned her face away from us and mumbled something.
David cupped a clawed hand to his pointed ear.
I've got great hearing, but could you speak up for the benefit of the lady beside me? Latro growled but dropped her arm, so she pressed the gun against her front.
Her booming voice echoed across the entire area.
I said the hair clings to the silver. I tilted my head to one side. Clings. As in doesn't dissolve.
She curtly nodded.
Yes. It wraps itself around anything silver and won't let go.
David chuckled.
Then I'd say looking for a werewolf is the opposite of what you should be doing, but I'll make you a deal.
He wrapped an arm around my shoulders and pressed me against his side. You promise to leave me and mine alone for the rest of your life, or even unlife should that happen, and we'll help you on this case. I whipped my head up to him.
What? She just kidnapped me and you want to help her? He smiled down at me. I want to avoid future kidnappings. Besides, you were always in good hands.
I had Pure install a tracking device in your car yesterday, while we were out on the island.
I pushed him away and glared at him. You what? Latro grinned and holstered her gun. Now this is getting interesting. I marched up to him and he backtracked. Why the hell did you do that?
I growled. He sheepishly grinned and held up his palms.
We're supposed to be on the same side, remember? I stood on my tiptoes, so I was even with his face.
That is, more even with him.
Allies aren't supposed to bug each other's cars.
David gestured to Latro.
But it helped me to find you here and with her. Latro leaned to one side and folded her arms across her chest. And if you two are done squabbling like an old married couple, I'd like to get back to business. I spun around and glared at her. Why should we help you? She smirked and shrugged.
Because I'm the good guy, and there's a half-dozen young women out there who need my help.
I'll help, David corrected her. Latro looked past me and frowned at him. We'll see what help you can give on this case, monster, and then I'll decide what I'll do with you and your woman.
David's eyes narrowed.
We make the deal now, or it's nothing. I stepped between them and held up my hands. I think we're getting nowhere fast.
I looked to David.
You agree to help her as much as you can, I turned my attention to Latro, and you agree to leave us alone as much as you can.
Deal. The pair furrowed their brows, but David sighed and shrugged.
Why not?
He stepped past me and held out his hand to Latro.
Deal. Her eyes flickered between his face and hand, but she grudgingly gave her own hand for a shake. Deal. I clapped my hands together. All right, now why did you kidnap me to help some kidnapped girls? Latro folded her arms and pursed her lips. Some 2 months back a woman disappeared from a nightclub.
Her friends and the police only found her purse in the washroom. 3 weeks later, another woman disappeared from a different nightclub, but also from the bathroom. Then 2 weeks ago 2 women disappeared within 2 nights of each other, and this last week 2 more vanished. All of them were last seen in the washrooms. David shrugged.
Doesn't sound like such a hard case. They were probably taken out a window. Latro shook her head. That doesn't cover all the washrooms.
Some of their windows are too small, or are barred, or both. They couldn't have gone out that way, and they didn't walk out the door either. They usually had a girlfriend with them, and they would have noticed them leaving. David crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow.
Nightclubs are busy places. Their friend might have left without their knowing. Latro glared at him. And then where did they go? And without their purses?
Their phones.
I held up my hand. We get the point, I agreed. They left without all the things they wouldn't have left without, so why did you expect a werewolf to be a master at kidnapping? The hair, she reminded me.
I raised the bag I still held and inspected the furry contents.
Where'd you find it? In the sink drain at one of the crime scenes.
It was buried pretty far in the pipe, which is why the police didn't get at it, she explained. David stared at her but nodded at the bag. Can you show us how it reacts to silver?
She shrugged. Why not?
We crowded around the table for the demonstration. I dropped the hair out the bag, and Latro pulled a bullet from a pack she had in her pocket. David's eyes narrowed.
She smirked at him. Easy. I won't use them on you while we're partners. Latro set the bullet on the table close to the hair.
David and I started back when the hair started forward. It wiggled its way over to the bullet, and hugged its furry body against the silver casing.
Latro pinched the hair and picked it up.
The bullet rose with the thing.
She held it out to us. See? I snorted. I've heard of hair clinging to faces, but never the face of a bullet.
David poked at the hair.
It hugged the silver tighter. He arched an eyebrow. Very strange. Have you taken the hair to Cotio? Latro frowned and dropped the bullet onto the table. No. He threatened me with his vial of acid if I ever came in there again.
The bullet rolled over the hair and fell away from its furry grasp before it rolled off the table. I caught the bullet.
Then we'll go in there and ask him. Latro dropped the hair back into its bag, but kept it to herself. Fine, but I'm going along with you.
4. We climbed into my car that sat on the road just outside the bunker. The old building turned out to be a manufacturing plant near the river. I wrinkled my nose as we passed by the smelly Cam River.
Latro sat in the back, and David was beside me.
I looked at my back passenger through the rear view mirror.
Nice place you took me. She scowled. It wasn't meant to be paradise, it was meant to throw him, she nodded at David, off our trail. He smiled. And it would have if I hadn't bugged the car.
My eyes flickered to him and I pursed my lips.
Speaking of that, where's the bug? He folded his arms and shook his head. I'm afraid that's on a need-to-know basis, and you need to know because this is my car, I growled. He chuckled. Then you'll get to know it intimately, trying to find the bug, because I'm still not telling you.
He tilted his head back and glanced at our rear passenger.
And speaking of bugs, something's been bothering me. How did you know that hair was important enough to keep? I snorted. How'd you even know a bunch of kidnappings would lead to a paranormal piece of fuzz?
Latro leaned back and glanced out the window.
You can't sneeze in this town without some paranormal creature having caused it. Her eyes flickered to David and her scowl deepened. For some reason, creatures of the night seem attracted to this place. He smiled and bowed his head. I'll take that as a compliment.
I much prefer that, over being called a creature of the morning.
I arched an eyebrow. Why is that? He chuckled.
Because nobody likes mornings, but the night is fun. I rolled my eyes.
I'm sorry I asked.
David returned his attention to our new friend.
But what about my question?
A few women in the stalls heard a struggle before one of the women disappeared. The police found a few stray hairs around the sink near her purse.
She held up the bag and shrugged. I figured there might be more in the drain, and found that. So that's when things got hairy.
I quipped. David turned to me with a fallen face.
That was terrible.
I grinned and shrugged.
I couldn't help it.
We arrived at Cotio's small shop a half-hour later. The scent of musty books and formaldehyde greeted us, as did the owner. The bell over the door rang, and the short, strange little man hurried up to us, his hands clasped together.
He stopped before us and bowed. What a pleasure to see you again. What can I? He'd lifted his head and his eyes fell on Latro. She smiled and waved.
His eyebrows crashed down and reached for his belt that was hidden beneath his short coat.
What are you doing here? I told you not to come back.
David stepped between them.
She's vicious this time.
Cotio's eyes flickered between them, but he dropped his hand.
Very well, but what of this sudden change in relationship? A lock of hair, David replied. He half turned and held out his hand. Latro rolled her eyes but dropped the bag into his palm.
David held the bag out to Cotio.
What can you tell us about this?
Cotio took the bag and squinted his eyes as he studied the hair.
It's a fine lock of curly hair.
David arched an eyebrow.
Anything else?
Cotio picked the hair from the bag and rubbed it between his fingers. He gave a cry when the hair latched onto one of the gold rings on his fingers. The little man jumped around with his hand flailing about. We leapt out of the mad dancer's way as he flung his hand in every direction.
Get it off.
Get it off, he screamed. David and I leapt at Cotio and tackled him to the ground. I plucked the hair off the finger and shoved the furry thing into the bag David held out to me. We leaned back on our haunches and Cotio sat up. He panted and clutched his hand to his chest.
So can you help us?
David asked him. He whipped his head to the bag and glared at it.
It's demonic.
Evil.
Destroy that thing at once.
David waved the bag over Cotio's head.
First tell us what it might belong to.
Cotio let out a shrill eek and clapped his fingers atop one another in an endless game of who's up to bat first.
He shook his head. I don't know, now get that thing out of here.
David tossed the hair onto the floor between Cotio's parted legs and stood.
Find out for me and I'll give you a hefty reward.
Cotio paused and whipped his head up.
Plus expenses.
My mate helped me up and nodded.
Plus expenses.
Cotio squealed and snatched up the bag.
He scurried onto his feet and bowed. As you wish.
David nodded.
Good. Call me when you find something. He turned to our new companion. In the meantime, do you have another lead we can follow? Only going to the scenes of the disappearances, she replied. He smiled down at me and offered me his arm. Care for a dance?
I grinned and accepted his arm.
Why not? Our first stop was a classy joint that proudly displayed its name in gold lettering above its weathered old door, Knocknee's Nicks.
It was situated a street short of hell and purgatory near the old railroad tracks in the northwest part of the city. It was out of the way for patrons but also for cops. I parked the car along what was called a curb some 50 years ago and stepped out. The club was so dilapidated, only the bird droppings could have held it together. David inspected the place and looked over the top of the car at me.
What do you think? I think I need a tetanus shot, I quipped as I walked around the front of the car.
Latro stepped out behind David.
He chuckled.
A whimsical observation.
I nodded at the door. That's no whimsy.
A sign on the door read closed.
Latro pulled something out of her coat. Let me handle this. She strode up to the door and we followed.
Our new companion knocked loudly on the door a couple of times. It was answered by a burly fellow with a puffy lower lip and a mug only a mother would look at.
Not love but look at. He snarled at us. Scram. We're not open yet. Latro raised what she held, and I saw it was a leather pocketbook.
She flipped open the book and flashed him something before she shut it.
We're here on a new lead in the disappearance of Miss Peribet.
The proprietor showed off a fine set of yellow teeth when he sneered at her.
Ain't you guys been around here enough? She shook her head. We're not through here until the case is solved, now please let us in.
The man growled but stepped aside. The dingy outside hid a dingy inside, but the place was clean. Maybe not of drugs but definitely of dirt.
Latro wagged a finger at us. Follow me.
She led us across a dark dance floor surrounded by tables, and to the back wall. The doors to the restrooms stood there, and we entered the one marked for women. We were greeted by a wall that started the row of stalls in front of us, and to our left were a counter, 2 sinks and a mirror over each of them. David looked around and sniffed the air.
How is it women's bathrooms are always cleaner than men's?
I glanced behind me at him and arched an eyebrow.
How many women's bathrooms have you been in?
He grinned.
More than you'd think. I held up my hand and shook my head. I don't want to know. Latro tucked the badge into her coat and strode up to the sink.
She turned to us and gestured to the porcelain.
This is the sink where I found the hair.
David and I walked over. He knelt down and sniffed the area.
I don't smell anything, wait.
He leaned closer and wiped his hand on the pipe. His fingers came away with a bit of water that dripped from the base of the sink. He stood and examined the water. I leaned against him and squinted my eyes.
Water? How very interesting.
He furrowed his brow and shook his head.
There's something strange about this water.
His eyes flickered to Latro. Do you know which sink the woman used, or if one of the sinks was running when they found the woman missing?
She shook her head. No, but I can find out.
Why?
What's the water to do with anything? He took a paper towel and wiped his fingers. There's a strange scent in the water. Maybe it's filtered, I suggested.
Latro gestured to the roughly painted walls around us.
In a place like this.
I looked to David.
What kind of strange scent? He shook his head. I don't know. It's almost metallic.
I'd guess there was copper in the water, but I only smell it in this sink.
Latro frowned. That's not much of a lead. He shrugged. That's all I can give.
She sighed and jerked her head towards the door.
All right, let's get that police report.
We walked out of the bathroom. The proprietor stepped from the shadows and glared at us. His eyes were a strange glowing green, and his curled lips revealed rows of sharp teeth.
You're not police, he snarled. Latro frowned. I showed you my badge, didn't I?
He clenched his hands into fists at his sides.
Let me see that badge again. He lunged at her.
We jumped to the side, and he crashed into the wall behind us. His hefty body left a nice imprint in the wall.
He spun around and snarled at us.
My eyes widened as I noticed tusks protrude from his lower lips and grow upward. His nose flattened and his nostrils widened. He lifted his fists, and I noticed his fat fingers were fatter and ended in hoof-like fingernails. "Whoever you are, you're gonna pay for making a fool out of me," he bellowed. Nick the pigman charged. David swept me into his arms and leapt over the monster. Latro dove beneath a nearby table. The owner skidded onto the dance floor and turned to face us. He brushed his feet against the ground like a bull about to charge.
"Stay still," he snarled.
David set me down and partially transformed into his sexy werewolf self. His clothes stretched but didn't tear. He flexed his long claw-tipped fingers, and when he grinned he showed off some nice sharp teeth. In the dim lighting his yellow eyes glowed like two candles. David stepped towards the pigman and chuckled.
"Here, piggy piggy."
The pigman's eyes widened. He stepped back and held his hoofed hands in front of him.
I didn't mean anything by it. I wasn't going to hurt you." I snorted. "Yeah, right, you were just going to hug us to death."
He stumbled into the row of tables at the front of the small club. One of the tables buckled beneath his massive weight, and he crashed to the ground amid a rubble of broken wood. David marched up to him and knelt in front of the cowering pig. He grabbed the owner's collar and shoved their faces together.
"Don't mess with a wolf again."
The pigman nodded his head like a bobble doll.
"Oh yeah.
Sure. No problem." David dropped him and stood to face us. He jerked his head towards the door.
"Let's get out of here."
5. David led us outside, where he reverted to his human form. His clothes were a little baggy now, but they fit well enough. I glanced from Latro to David.
"Okay, what the hell was that thing?"
David adjusted his clothes.
"A shifter like me, but of the porcine variety." I threw up my arms. "Of course there's pig shifters."
"Any chance we can meet someone who transforms into a toaster with bread? I forgot to eat breakfast, and all this exercise isn't helping my empty stomach." David chuckled. "Be careful what you wish for."
Latro was in the lead. She spun around to face David and glared at him. "Don't change into that thing again." He smiled. "Is that your sweet way of saying thank you for saving your life?"
She pulled out her gun and pointed it at him.
"That's my nice way of telling you not to do it again. The gun is my not nice way."
He held up his hands, but the smile didn't leave his delicious lips.
All right. I promise not to do it for the rest of this investigation."
She pursed her lips but holstered her gun.
Her eyes flickered to me. "Take us to Precinct 13.
We can get a police report there."
I held up my hand. "Wait a sec. I want to know what you showed that big guy."
"The badge, or whatever it was."
Latro sighed but dug into her jacket and tossed the leather case to me. I juggled it and opened the flap.
A small round stone was embedded in the other side of the case. My eyes flickered up to Latro.
"What's this?" "It's a deception stone."
"It fools the weak-minded into believing what I want them to see," she explained. David took the badge from me and inspected the rock.
"Cotio sells these, but they cost quite a bit." Latro grinned. "You could say I borrowed it from his shop." I arched an eyebrow. "So it can make anyone believe anything you want them to see." She nodded. "Yeah, and I know what you're thinking. It's only bad if you use it for bad things. I use it for good."
David tossed the case back to her.
"Just like I use my curse for good." Latro frowned and tucked the pouch into her coat. "Let's just go."
I chauffeured my strange companions to Precinct 13. An unlucky number for most.
I parked on the curb. Latro opened her door. "Stay here."
She slipped out and hurried up the stairs, where she disappeared into the building.
I glanced at David. Are you sure we should be trusting her? He smiled at me. Not having fun? I shrugged. Oh, sure.
Getting kidnapped, missing a day of work, and dealing with a pigman are loads of fun. When do we get to meet that toaster man again? David slipped his arm behind my shoulders and leaned towards me. His low voice sent thrills through me.
We could go home for a little while and have some lunch in bed.
I closed my eyes and clenched my teeth, but I couldn't block out the wonderfully delicious images he conjured in my mind.
You're evil, you know that? I whispered.
He chuckled and pecked a small kiss on my cheek.
Yes, I do.
Our companion emerged from the police department, with a folder in one hand. Her steps were quick, and she glanced over her shoulder more than once before she reached the sidewalk. She slid into the back seat and stuck her head between the two seats.
Step on it, she hissed. I blinked at her. Why?
What's there? The pair of doors at the head of the stairs burst open and two uniformed policemen rushed out. They whipped their heads this way and that, searching the sidewalk and streets.
Oh.
I drove off before their inquisitive eyes fell on my little car. David half turned in his seat as Latro fell back against hers.
I hope what you found was worth the trouble.
She plopped the folder open on her lap and rummaged through the papers and pictures.
Let's find out. I arched an eyebrow and looked at her through the rear view mirror. You mean you just took the folder without knowing what was in it?
Her eyes flickered up to the same mirror.
I have an enchanted stone, not an ability to be invisible. I took what I could carry and hurried out of there.
David slipped a sheet from the folder and glanced over the details.
You took the entire investigation report. I didn't have a chance to be choosy, she snapped.
She paused in her perusing and picked up a paper.
This might be useful. She handed the paper to David. He straightened and inspected the contents.
My eyes flickered to him.
Mind reading it to me? He cleared his throat. It's a list of similarities for each of the victims.
They've all been single, wealthy, and they all wore a gold bracelet the night they disappeared. I raised an eyebrow.
That's oddly specific. But to our advantage, he commented. He handed the paper back to Latro. It means we know how to set a trap for the kidnapper.
My eyes narrowed.
What kind of trap?
Latro stuck the paper back with the rest and closed the folder.
I'll use myself as bait to lure in the kidnapper. You two can drop me off anywhere, and I'll consider us even.
David smiled.
You can't set this trap without us. And what about me?
I fit the description except for the rich part, I pointed out. David glanced over his shoulder.
A part you don't fit either, Latro. She glared at him. I'll make do.
He nodded at the folder.
Those women were wealthy, which means you're going to need a real gold bracelet, and it so happens that I have a few of those lying around my home. Latro's scowl deepened. She turned her face away and crossed her arms. Fine, but don't expect any thanks from me. No need.
I can get my thanks from the women, David teased. I whipped my head to him and frowned.
He held his hands up. Within reason, of course.
I rolled my eyes.
Of course.
We were in the commercial district now. Latro nodded at a coming corner.
Drop me off here.
I parked the car and she opened the door but paused.
I'll meet you two at the Four Horsemen Club at 7 o'clock.
Be dressed to dance and bring those bracelets.
I arched an eyebrow and looked through the rear view mirror. The Four Horsemen Club. She nodded. It's where the last woman disappeared. And don't be late.
She stepped out, slammed the door and disappeared into the crowds. I pulled away from the curb and headed for home. A sudden thought struck me, and I sank down in my seat and sighed.
You know, we just had the perfect opportunity to get out of this mess, and we didn't take it.
David leaned towards me and pecked another teasing kiss on my cheek.
You wouldn't have wanted to miss out on this fun. I glared at him. You're still evil. He wagged his eyebrows at me. I know a way I can be even more evil.
A strong wave of heat swept over me.
I tamped it down. Down, boy.
I'm driving.
He sighed and straightened in his seat. Right now, maybe, but let's just wait until we get home.
6. We arrived at David's stately mansion a few minutes later. Pure greeted us at the door and bowed.
Good morning, sir, Miss Combes.
David swept past him and into the entrance hall.
Any messages from Cotio?
Pure shut the door and shook his head.
Nothing.
David pursed his lips.
The guy's getting slow. I thought he'd have something for us about that fur by now.
Pure arched an eyebrow.
Fur, sir.
David shook his head.
It's nothing.
He glanced at me and looked me up and down.
You look like you could use a shower. I glanced down at myself.
I was wrinkled and dusty from my early morning kidnapping.
I suppose, and then some breakfast. At noon, miss.
Pure wondered.
It's as good a time as any, I returned. He bowed. Very well.
I will have breakfast ready in half an hour.
Better make it an hour. This could take some scrubbing, David spoke up.
Pure raised an eyebrow.
Very well. He turned and left us alone.
I skirted my mischievous mate and put one foot on the bottom step of the stairs.
I can wash myself, you know.
David turned to me and grinned. He walked over and set his hand on the banister.
I know, but it's much faster with two helping. I stepped onto the second step and snorted. Not with you. He followed my step.
His strong body brushed against mine.
I can reach places you can't. I moved backwards away from him. And everything in between, right?
He matched my movement, so I was forced to step backwards up the stairs.
The more the merrier. Two's a crowd. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. That doesn't even make sense. He shrugged.
By this time we were at the head of the stairs, and I was walking backwards down the hall.
It just seemed appropriate. I snorted. You're not going to let me have the chance to know what it means to be alone. He chuckled. Not if I can help it.
We'd reached the door to our room.
I turned the knob and smiled at him. Challenge accepted. I flew into the room and slammed the door shut. There was a lock on the doorknob that I secured.
David's body slammed against the entrance a split second later.
The knob danced as he tried to open it. I stood back and clasped my hands behind my back.
David knocked on the door.
You're not going to leave your lover out in this cold, drafty hallway, are you?
I unbuttoned my wrinkled blouse.
You've got a fur coat. There was silence for a moment.
Then David's strained voice called to me.
You're undressing, aren't you? Maybe, I cooed. He pounded on the door. Let me in. Or what? Or I'll huff and puff and blow this door down.
I grinned.
Sounds kinky.
The doorknob jingled. He spoke in more of a growl than a human voice.
Open the door, Dakota.
I unbuttoned my dress jeans.
Maybe after I'm done with my shower. I started back when his shoulder slammed into the door.
The lock gave way, as did the rest of the entrance. The wood flew open and slammed into the wall. David stepped inside. His yellow eyes glared at me. His hands ended in long sharp nails. That familiar, sensual husky scent of his wafted over me.
He slammed the door shut.
The force of the slam was all that kept it in place.
I held up my hands and stepped back. Down, boy.
Down.
He stalked towards me.
Those heated yellow eyes sent a thrill of passion through me that made me shudder.
I'm not a pig shifter, remember?
No eating the girlfriend. The back of my knees hit the foot of the bed, and I fell onto the covers. David leapt at me and placed his hands on either side of me. He leaned close so our faces nearly touched. His lips curled back in a feral grin. One of his hands slid onto my thigh.
I closed my eyes and turned my face away.
His warm breath wafted over my cheek.
"So you want to play hard to get," he growled. I swallowed. Maybe." He pressed a hot kiss against my neck.
His wandering hand slid up my side and cupped my bra-covered breast. I gasped as he massaged the mound of flesh.
"You've certainly made things hard for me."
I grasped the sheets between my hands and smiled at him.
"There's a way you can fix that."
A sly grin slipped onto his lips.
"Then let's begin."
He pressed our lips together in a hot, passionate kiss. I wrapped my arms around his neck and groaned. He pulled me further onto the bed so I could lay down, and he stretched his body over mine. His hard, thick manhood pressed against my inner thigh.
I squirmed. The friction didn't help either of us.
The beast inside him awakened.
He tore away my open shirt and bra.
His wet lips rained hot kisses over my half-naked body. I moaned and clenched the sheets between my fingers. My body felt like it was on fire. I ached for his lips and his teasing fingers as they danced along my quivering skin. He fed the fire within me with his sensual touch. His lips suckled at my breasts. His hand opened my pants and slipped into my underwear. I jumped when his finger glided between my warm, wet folds. The deep, consuming hunger inside me exploded into a blind lust.
I arched my hips and rubbed myself against his teasing finger.
The delicious friction heightened my pleasure, but my body demanded more. I needed him to take me and possess me, to satiate this carnal desire that ate away at both of us. He grunted and lifted his head. His nostrils flared as he took in my scent. Those wonderfully heated eyes stared down at me with a primal lust that made me shiver. He tore off his clothing and took mine with his. In a few moments our sweat-soaked bodies lay naked on the covers. He covered me with him and thrust hard and deep into my hot, wet core. I grasped his shoulders and smiled.
This was what I wanted, what I craved so deeply.
This consummation of our love and lust for one another. A union of body and soul that would consume us.
"Yes," I groaned.
He pushed in and out in a deliriously slow pace. I rocked my hips in time with him, and reveled in the feel of him inside me.
The tension in my body tightened. I panted for breath.
My lust threatened to overwhelm me.
I had no fear of that.
It could sweep me away on its wonderfully exotic wings, if only my lover never stopped his sensual caresses. His deep groans teased my ears. His hands reached up and massaged my swollen breasts. His thick pulsing manhood stroked my trembling nerves. I whimpered and squirmed.
The heat inside me was unbearable.
I wrapped my legs around his waist and deepened our union. My hands petted his wet hair as my chants filled the room.
"Oh God. Oh God, yes." I leaned my head back and groaned. "Faster.
Deeper. Oh God, more." He grunted and thrust harder into me. My trembling pleasure tightened.
Our sensual lovemaking turned into a wild, feral rut.
I clutched onto him and closed my eyes as he took me with the passion of a lover starved for my body. My body strained against him. The delicious pleasure grew more and more intense. My own strained voice sounded foreign to my ears and grew louder with each of his wild thrusts.
"Yes.
Oh God, take me.
Take me.
Make me yours."
He raised his head.
Those beautiful yellow eyes penetrated me to my very soul. He curled his lips back in a sly, possessive smile.
"Mine and only mine."
I shuddered. The pleasure inside me burst open. A wave of lust and desire swept over me, consuming me in their deliciously warm arms. My lover thrust long and hard into me. I was his, and he would take me hot and hard. My calls of pleasure rang off the walls. Oh God. Oh my God. So close.
I was almost there.
My body strained to reach the bliss his feral lust promised me.
Harder.
Faster. An explosion of pleasure overtook me. I cried out to the heavens my wonder, as my body was enveloped in the bliss created by our union. My lover came soon after me, and we collapsed as a mess of wet bodies atop the sheets. David pressed me close to him, and managed to wrap the top cover over us. I nestled against his hard chest and sighed.
That is, until my stomach grumbled.
I sighed.
You're going to drive me into an early hunger grave.
He chuckled.
There are worse ways to go. I closed my eyes. Well, wake me when food's ready, or you'll find out how worse it is to be munched to death by a hungry mate. Your wish is my command.
7. The rest of the day was swept away in similar fashion, and at around 6 o'clock we started to prepare for our meeting with Latro.
At least I did. Come on. There's enough time for a quickie.
David pleaded as he tried to catch me before I slid out of bed.
I dodged his needy hand and took a sheet with me. We've got dressing and dinner before we meet Latro at this wolf den.
I paused and furrowed my brow.
Come to think of it, I don't even know where that place is.
David sat up and chuckled.
Fortunately I do.
It's a fashionable club in the red light district of the city. I whipped my head to him and narrowed my eyes.
One of your usual haunts. He held up his hands.
It blocked my view of his muscular chest.
In a previous life. Now that's no more. I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. Or rather, I tried to.
My fingers got stuck in the nest. Any idea if maybe the club owned by the pig shifter and this one are connected?
He shook his head. They're not.
The owner of this club is a lovely woman by the name of Lilith, and she's one of the last people to allow a pig into her place of business. I grinned and folded my arms over my chest.
So does that mean you have to stay outside?
He chuckled.
She makes an exception for me. I do have money, after all. I swept my eyes over the room. I wouldn't know.
You haven't showered me with diamonds and jewels yet. He feigned an aghast expression and leapt out of bed.
I haven't. Then let's remedy that situation right now.
I pointed at the area below his waist.
You might want to get some clothes on. He held up a finger. Wait. I have a compromise.
David hurried into the bathroom and came out with a robe. He strode to the vanity and opened one of the top drawers. I watched him pull out a tall wide box covered in purple velvet and gold. He set the box on the top of the vanity and opened the lid. I crept over and looked inside. My eyes widened as I beheld small compartments filled with shimmering jewels and diamonds. Other precious stones were set into rings and brooches. His eyes studied me, and a smile teased the corners of his lips.
What do you think? I nodded at the box. I think you need to find a safer place to put that box. He chuckled. If I can't protect a small box of jewels, then you might be in trouble. I can protect myself, I argued. This morning's episode would seem to contradict that, but we'll say I'm not only my own best friend, but a very good guard hound.
He pulled off the top compartment to reveal the interior. Gold bracelets and watches were stacked atop each other, but there was a small velvet case among the trinkets.
He took it and held it out to me. See this?
I accepted the case and opened the lid. My eyes fell on a gold necklace that was graced with stones of pure amethysts. The stones that lay higher on the necklace were small, but became progressively larger the closer they came to the neckline. A single large translucent stone was set in the center.
Do you like it?
David asked me. I couldn't pull my eyes away, but I swallowed and nodded.
It's beautiful. He leaned close to me. It's yours.
I whipped my head up and blinked at him.
Mine. He smiled and nodded. Yes.
It belonged to my mother, and I can't think of a better person to give it to than my mate.
I shook my head. But he pressed a finger against my lips. Don't make me call a justice of the peace and make us late to meet Latro.
Her sunny disposition would be ruined.
He nodded at the case in my hand. It's a little fancy to wear for clubbing, but it might attract our foe. I smiled and wrapped my arms around his neck. He stumbled back but kept us upright. Thank you so much, I whispered into his ear.
He pulled me off and chuckled.
Any more whispering like that, and we will be late to meet Latro. Besides, he pointed down at me, your sheet is slipping.
I gathered my sheet about me, and gathered some clothes for the evening. David did the same, and in a few minutes we were dressed for a night on the town. We ate a meal provided by Pure, and drove to our meeting place. The Four Horsemen Club was in the red light district of the city, where old 4-floor brick buildings stood side by side and towered over the narrow road. The alleys behind them were almost as crowded as the sidewalks in front. People clamored to get into the more popular joints, with lines that stretched around blocks. We double parked in front of one of those tall buildings and stepped out. The line into that place snaked around the block. The sign over the door read the Four Horsemen. A giant of a man guarded the door. I noticed Latro in the long line. She was 20 people away from the door, and the line wasn't moving. Our companion stepped out of line and strode over to us. She traded her usual leather in for a black skirt and blouse. She jerked her head towards the door and its giant.
We're not getting in any time soon. That guy's got a list and I doubt we're on it.
David smiled.
Let's see.
He walked over to the door, and Latro and I followed. My mate bowed his head to the guard.
Good evening. I was wondering if I could get in. The giant glared at him and shook his head.
David pulled out his wallet, and slid 100 from its brothers.
Not even for this. He got the same reply.
David shrugged, tucked the bill into his wallet, and turned to us.
Looks like we'll have to try a different route.
He looped his arms through ours and marched us away from the door.
Latro tried to free herself, but his werewolf grip was too powerful. What the hell are you doing? She hissed.
Getting us in through a different route, he reminded her. He led us to the alley along the right wall of the building, and into its dark depths.
There was a side door there.
Loud music wafted through the entrance. He released us at the entrance and rapped on the flimsy old wood.
The place is full.
Get lost, a voice barked. David leaned close to the door.
I've got some brooms to deliver. There was a pause.
The door unlocked and was opened by a disagreeable-looking man with dark shadows beneath his eyes. Behind him was a short hallway that led to a square dance floor.
He sneered at us but stepped aside. Don't stick to the human area.
Get down to the lower level, and stay there. David smiled and saluted. He led us down the narrow hall that ended with a janitor's closet to our right. Around the walls of the club were thick curtains that brushed against the round tables. People danced and talked, and imbibed in enough alcohol to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool. David's eyes flickered to Latro.
Which bathroom was it? She frowned at him. What is that supposed to mean? It means there's 2 bathrooms. Was it the upper or lower one? He persisted. She furrowed her brow. I think they said it was the top bathroom, but I just thought that meant the more prestigious one. He chuckled. Not in this place.
Come on. David guided us to the far left corner of the place where the doors to the bathrooms lay. Women were on the right, men on the left. He turned to us and swept his hand towards the one marked for our sex.
Ladies first, he offered. Latro held out her hand. The bracelet.
David's eyes widened.
Oh, right. The right attire.
He rummaged through his pants pocket and pulled out another gold bracelet. I already wore mine. He dropped the article into Latro's palm and smiled at her.
Remember to return that when you're done playing with it.
She frowned at him as she slipped the piece of jewelry onto her left wrist. The bowl shimmered in the dim light of the shadowed room. Her eyes flickered to me, and she jerked her head towards the bathroom door.
Come on.
I followed her, but David caught my arm. He looked me in the eyes and pursed his lips.
Whatever happens, remember I'm right outside.
I gave him a coy smile.
I'll make sure toss you a line of toilet paper so you can get me out.
He returned my smile with a grin.
That's my girl.
He released my arm and gave my rear a pat to get me going.
I scowled at him and slipped into the bathroom.
The dozen stalls ran along the left-hand wall, and in front of us was a long counter with sinks buried in the top. A mirror graced the wall above the counter.
On the opposite wall from the entrance, and 6 feet off the floor, was a small square window.
Bars and a lack of space meant that wasn't an exit.
The room was clean and quiet.
A quick look under the stalls told us no one else was there.
Latro turned to me and jerked her head towards one of the stalls. Go in there.
Whatever you hear, don't come out until I yell for you, got that?
I arched an eyebrow. What exactly is the plan here? And what's the backstory?
She rolled her eyes and sighed.
The story is the last girl to disappeared from this bathroom.
You're going to stay in the stall because the girls have only been taken when there was no one else in sight. Understand?
Now I almost hoped something would make her disappear. I strode over to the stall and opened the door, but paused and glanced over my shoulder. All right, but don't expect me to jump out and not have some toilet paper stuck to my shoe. She pursed her lips. I'll risk it, now get in there. I stepped into the stall and shut the door. The toilet was clean, but like all public ones, there wasn't a lid.
I was forced to lean against the wall or face the indignity of sitting on a toilet without the need to go. The seconds passed by. A faucet turned on.
I scraped the toe of my shoe against the small tiles. Can I at least talk? Latro sighed. Yes. How long did it take for the women to disappear? Less than an hour.
8. I pushed off the wall and flew out of the stall. Latro stood in front of the sink, or at least what of her that wasn't being dragged into the running water of the turned-on faucet. Her left arm up to her elbow disappeared into the clear moving water, but didn't come out the other end. A bright light emanated from the top of the faucet to the point of contact. She grasped the end of the faucet with her other hand, and her heels were dug into the small slick tiles. I leapt at her and grabbed what I could see of her left arm. We both pulled, and little by little her arm appeared. So did a pair of tiny human hands. They were wrapped around her wrist and the bracelet. The door to the bathroom flew open and David lunged inside. He wasn't transformed but for his bright yellow eyes. His abrupt entrance and Latro's slippery skin meant I lost my grip. Her feet flew out from beneath her, and she dove headfirst into the running water. Her body warped like a reflection in water, and shrank to fit into the small flowing stream that dropped from the faucet. David rushed to my side just as the last bit of her disappeared. He grasped my upper arms, and we both stared for a long moment at the running water. I creakily glanced up into David's wide eyes. My words came out in a hushed, choked tone.
Did what I saw happen really happen?
He nodded his head, without shifting his eyes away from the water.
Yeah.
I swallowed and jerked my head towards the faucet.
Any idea what that was? He shook his head.
His eyes were still glued to the faucet.
No. I frowned and stomped my foot on his. He yelped and glared at me. What did you do that for? Stop speaking in single-syllable words and start giving me some answers, I growled. He shrugged. I can't.
I can't even give me some answers because I honestly don't know what happened.
I glanced back at the faucet. You know anything about plumbing? Only how to take it apart, but if you want it back together, you might want to hire someone, he replied. I nodded at the faucet head. There was some sort of a light from the head of that faucet. Let's see if there's something in there that might have taken her. He stepped past me and up to the sink. It's going to get really wet, he warned me. I stepped back and grabbed some towels from the dispenser. I'm ready.
David shrugged and tore off the head of the faucet. Water shot out of the cold and hot taps that ran beneath the counter and rained down on us. He held the faucet away from the counter, and I saw something drop to the floor with a nice tinkle sound of metal on tile. I knelt down and spotted my prey beneath the counter. That's when the door opened and a woman stepped inside. David and I stared at her.
She blinked at us.
We blinked at her.
She threw up her arms and screamed.
David used his hand to angle the spouting water at her.
The woman was drenched in a second.
She gargled instead of screamed, but that didn't stop her from running out of the room. David threw down the faucet and grabbed my hand.
Time to go. I snatched up the object on the floor, and he pulled me to my feet.
We raced out of the room but skidded to a wet stop a yard from the door.
The club was almost empty.
I saw the last few patrons ushered out the front door by the giant.
The almost part of that was because of two people who stood in front of us.
One of them was a tall, pale man. His complexion resembled that of Basilius, but his blood-red eyes bespoke of a little more hostility. Beside him stood a woman of 30 with long red hair. She wore a long red dress with a slit that reached to her waist.
The clothes hugged all the right curves and suited her smooth, beautiful white face.
Her green eyes swept over us and a sly smile graced her rose-colored lips. She folded her arms over her ample chest as her gaze fell on David.
Mr. Dives, what a pleasant surprise.
David smiled and swept his arm in front of him to give her a majestic bow.
What sprayed across the floor in front of him? Good evening, Miss Lilith.
She glanced past us at the bathroom. Water flowed from beneath the door.
She arched an eyebrow. What exactly have you done this time?
My eyes flickered to him and I pursed my lips.
This time? He chuckled. Nothing serious. Just tore out a sink.
He slipped behind me and grasped my arms.
But if you'll excuse us.
David pulled me towards the door, but the pale man stepped into our path, blocking our way. Lilith wagged a finger at us and clucked her tongue.
I know you better than that, Mr. Dives.
You were here for a reason, now tell me it. He whipped his head towards our left and pointed at something.
Goblins.
Lilith didn't flinch, but she did laugh.
Do you really think I'm that?
Her speech about her intellect was interrupted when a little green goblin leapt onto her back and pulled at the rear strap of her dress. The posh outfit slid up and revealed a lack of underwear. About a dozen of them poured from the door marked for the janitor and sprang at the pair. Lilith's pale companion spun around and knocked them from the air.
They slammed into the floor and left body impressions.
A few managed to get past them and spring at us. David pulled me behind him and grabbed the lead one by the collar. He threw the green creature into its companions, then returned his attention to me.
Run.
I sprinted for the door with David close behind me. We reached the entrance and the giant stepped inside. He curled his lips and snarled at us. David pushed me out of the way and swung his fist at the monstrosity. It connected, but David came out the worse for wear. He yelped and pulled back his crinkled fingers.
The giant chuckled and grabbed him about the neck.
He lifted David off the floor and squeezed. David grasped the giant's hands, but he couldn't loosen the strong hold. I looked around for something, anything to help. My eyes fell on a nearby table with its cloth. I grabbed the cover and pulled the cloth off, without disturbing anything on the top.
I had to pause to admire my work before I turned to David and Goliath.
I tossed the cloth over the giant's head, grabbed the four corners and pulled. The giant dropped David and tugged on the cloth.
He tore it from my hands and spun around to snarl at me.
David swept between us and swept me into his arms. He dodged a grab by the giant and slammed his shoulder into the front doors. They broke apart and we tumbled into the crowded streets. People gawked at us as we stood and brushed ourselves off. David grabbed my hand and pulled me into his car. We sped off down the road. I glanced over my shoulder and watched the giant stumble from the club. Close behind him were our two other new acquaintances, and none of them looked happy. David's voice brought me back to the car.
Looks like I won't be going to that place for a while. I turned in my seat and frowned at him. At least wait until those marks are off your neck.
David reached up and rubbed his palm over the handprints left by the giant.
He winced. I feel what you mean. You still got what we found?
I reached into my pocket and pulled out the coin.
Yeah, but I don't know what it means.
David turned us onto a new road, and towards the older district.
Let's see if Cotio knows anything about this.
9. We arrived at Cotio's place, and found the shop open for the late-hour business. I followed David inside and looked around.
Doesn't this guy ever sleep? I wondered.
We reached the desk. David smiled at me and held out his hand.
Do you really want to learn about his personal life?
I shuddered and dropped a coin into his hand.
I'm sorry I asked.
Cotio stepped through the rear doorway of the shop and smiled at us.
Just the two people I wish to see. I have found the origin of most of the hair you brought me.
David raised the coin to show Cotio.
Does it have anything to do with this?
Cotio stepped up to the desk and took the coin.
He turned the object over in his hand and studied it.
The little man furrowed his brow, and his eyes flickered up to us.
Where did you get this?
In a sink, but you didn't answer my question, David persisted. Cotio nodded and pulled out the bag with the hair.
The two are undoubtedly connected.
Both belong to a leprechaun.
I blinked at him. Come again.
David leaned towards me.
He said both belong. I scowled and pushed him away. I know what he said, but are they really real? I wondered.
Cotio nodded.
As real as you or I, and quite dangerous. I arched an eyebrow. Dangerous how?
Cotio cleared his throat.
Leprechauns are not what is shown on television in those strange food commercials humans are so fond of.
They have an obsession with gold, and will do almost anything to acquire more of it for their pot. Otherwise, a leprechaun generally keeps to himself in their fairy realm outside the boundaries of humans. David pursed his lips.
That explains why all the girls who were taken wore jewelry, but not why he took the women.
Cotio's eyes flickered between us.
Taking women. What would a leprechaun do with a woman?
David shrugged.
That's what we're trying to find out.
We just watched Latro be pulled into a running faucet by a pair of small hands. Cotio looked down at the coin in his palm.
And this was in the faucet.
David nodded.
Yeah, but what does that mean?
A strange smile slipped onto the proprietor's face.
Let me show you.
Cotio set the coin on the counter and took up a nearby glass. He poured water into it and dropped a coin into the glass.
The heavy metal sank to the bottom.
Cotio rolled up one sleeve and dipped a finger into the glass. His fingernail touched the coin, and a bright light burst from the metal. My eyes widened.
It's that light again. The one from the bathroom.
Cotio removed his finger, and the light vanished. He rolled up his sleeve and pursed his lips.
That is a light to the domain of the world of the leprechauns.
David nodded at the coin.
So you're saying that coins are key to their world?
Cotio nodded.
Yes.
All the coins that are smelted by the leprechauns are keys back to their home.
They always carry one around with them, so they can go home whenever they please.
I leaned down and studied the glass.
But why did you put it in water? For the same reason rainbows are always in their myths, Cotio explained.
He dipped 2 fingers in the glass and lifted the coin. Water dripped off the bottom and into the glass.
The coin needs to be wet to open the portal.
Oftentimes the coin is placed in a rotten stump to expose the metal to water so they can use the portal as often as weather allows.
I straightened. I guess that explains why all the women were kidnapped in bathrooms. There's probably a coin in all of them.
David furrowed his brow.
You said most of the hair belonged to a leprechaun. What about the other hairs?
Cotio shrugged.
It was very coarse and stiff, almost like a hair from a comb.
David's eyes narrowed.
Like a pig's hair.
Cotio nodded.
Yes.
Why? I looked up into David's face.
You're not thinking what I think you're thinking, are you?
David half turned to me and offered me his arm.
We have a pig to visit. You're sure he's involved?
It is his bathroom, I pointed out. David smiled.
He's a male pig, my dear, and I very much doubt he cleans the bathrooms himself. I sighed and took his arm. All right, but I called dibs on the first insult.
David paid Cotio and we drove to Knockney's Nick's, the first club we visited owned by Mr. Nick himself. The hour was about 11, and the whole place was hopping. It was a wall-to-wall grinding of bodies that danced to a pounding beat of a DJ, who knew more about grinding records than recording on them. We found our target behind the bar serving an endless supply of drinks to his thirsty customers. Nick recognized us because he gave us a sweet greeting.
Scram, he growled after his eyes fell on us.
David leaned his elbows on the bar and smiled at him.
Good evening, Nick.
We thought we'd ask you a few questions. Nick glared at David.
I know you're not cops, so get lost.
David drew out the coin and held it up in clear view.
Pity. We thought you might know something about this.
He shrugged and pocketed the coin.
Guess we'll just have to tell the paranormal society that you're up to something fishy.
Nick's face turned a wonderful shade of white. His eyes narrowed, and he ground his teeth together.
Hold on.
He glanced at the bartender to his right.
Handle things here. I'll be right back.
Nick jerked his head to his left, and we followed him down the bar to a room marked office. We stepped inside the cramped room and Nick shut the door behind us. He slipped past us and settled himself into the large padded chair behind the tall wide desk that sat in the back. There wasn't any other piece of furniture in the room, except a filing cabinet to our left. Nick leaned back and studied us.
What do you want?
David shrugged. A little info, and maybe a half-dozen girls.
Maybe not Latro, though. I glared at him. He shrugged. Okay, maybe Latro.
Nick clasped his hands together atop his ample stomach, and chuckled.
And you think I have them?
David smiled and shook his head.
No, we think your Lucky Charms friend does, and you're getting something sweet out of the deal. Nick's face fell.
David planted his palms on the desk and leaned forward.
We want you to tell your friend to give the girls back, or we make good on our threat to tell the paranormal society.
Nick leaned forward and glared at David.
Let's just say I might believe your threat. What proof do you have that I'm involved?
David pulled out the bag of fur and swung it from side to side in front of Nick.
Just a few hairs that belong to you, and some that belong to a leprechaun.
Nick's eyes narrowed.
Have you told anyone about this?
David pocketed the bag and shook his head.
No, but if you don't cooperate, we'll be forced to.
He stood and placed his hands on the table. My eyes widened as I watched the bulge and thicken. He curled his lips back and showed off the pair of tusks that grew upward from his lower lips. Nick's deep rumbling chuckle finished in an oink.
Then I guess that means I'm going to have to take care of you now.
Nick shoved the desk aside. The wood crashed into the wall as the pigman dove at us. David pushed me out of the way. Nick grabbed his shoulders, and the two of them careened into the front wall of the office. The thin wood wasn't strong enough to support the crash, and the pair tumbled through the splintered boards and onto the dance floor. The patrons screamed and ran for the exit. David tossed the pig off him, and into the center of the empty dance floor. They both climbed to their feet. My mate took a step back and flexed his growing claws.
I think Latro will forgive me for breaking my promise.
I noticed the bag of hair drop from David's clothes. I scooped it up and slipped behind him to peek over his increasingly tall shoulder. The pigman's clothes burst open and pink, bristle-covered skin poked out from the seams. He pawed his feet against the grate like a bull, and clacked his hard finger hoofs together.
Come on, doggy. Let's see what you've got, he grunted. I cringed and stepped to the side. What she doesn't know won't hurt us.
David's own clothes tore open as he transformed into his wolfy self. The pair of them rushed each other and met in a hail of clawed and hoofed fists. The punches flew too fast for me to follow. They took turns tossing each other into the tables and chairs. I skirted the wall until I hit the women's bathroom. A terrifyingly stupid idea hit me.
I tightened my hand on the bag and slipped into the bathroom.
The area was deserted.
I hurried over to the sinks and unscrewed the heads.
The one against the wall farthest from the door dropped a shiny metal present. I picked up the coin and pulled out the leprechaun hair from the bag. A quick turn of the faucet, and I stood poised to do something really stupid. I took a deep breath and shoved both hair and coin under the running water. A bright light burst from the coin. I looked away and shut my eyes. A soft tug at my hand turned into a hard pull. I dug my heels into the floor, but every club bathroom in the world had a slick floor. I yelped as I dove headfirst into the portal. 10.
I hit the ground hard and tumbled until I knocked into something that smelled of damp.
The world spun around me, or it would if I had my eyes open. I opened my scrunched eyes and found myself on my back, gazing up into a clear blue sky.
The hard object I hit was a tree stump, and beneath me was a fine field of grass.
I sat up and saw I lay in a meadow filled with flowers of every color and size. Softwood trees lined the perimeter, and a soft gurgle told me water ran nearby. Off in the distance I glimpsed snow-capped mountains.
A crunch behind me made me flip over and spin around.
My eyes widened when I saw it was Latro, who stood a few yards from me. Her mouth dropped open before it snapped shut. She balled her hands into fists and marched over to stand over me.
What the hell are you doing here? She barked. I scrambled to my feet and glared at her. Trying to save your sorry ass, that's what. Then you're the stupidest rescuer in the world, she growled. Why?
Because you're stuck here with the rest of 'em, a voice spoke up. I whipped my head left and right. My eyes caught on something behind me, and I turned to the stump. A little man dressed in an emerald green suit sat on the stump. He had a 4-leaf clover in his flat hat, and a smile on his lips. He stood and swept his arm in front of him to bow to me.
A pleasure to meet ya, I'm sure.
I pointed at the little man, and glanced over my shoulder at Latro.
Is that what I think it is?
She moved to stand beside me and grimly nodded.
Yes. It's a leprechaun.
The little man's bushy eyebrows crashed down.
I'm not an it, any more than you two are ladies. Our name is O'Flanagan, and you'd be best to remember it, as you might be here a while. I folded my arms and glared at him. Why?
Because you're not having what it takes to be leaving this place, he returned. I grinned and opened my palm to show him the hair and coin.
You mean these things I used to get in here?
His eyes widened and his mouth twisted into a hideous scowl.
Give toes, Tommy. He leapt at me, but I held them above my head.
The little man jumped up and down, but missed them by half a mile. Give me toes.
They be mine. They be mine until you two tell me what the hell is going on, I told him.
Latro pursed her lips and pointed down at the hopping fool.
This little idiot got a curse on him, and now he's trying to break it by kidnapping women. I blinked at her. What kind of a curse has someone do that?
O'Flanagan stopped his jumping and glared up at me.
Ta worst kind.
One placed upon me by a fiendish woman.
Latro frowned at him. You're the one who jilted her.
The leprechaun turned his face away and stuck his lips out in a pout.
How was I to know she was a witch? You shouldn't have jilted her, Latro scolded him. I held up my hands. People.
Person and leprechaun. Could I be caught up to this lovely conversation? O'Flanagan crossed his arms and slumped his shoulders.
Latro jerked her head towards the little man. This idiot jilted a witch, and now he's trapped in the leprechaun world until he kisses his true love. I snorted. You're kidding, right?
O'Flanagan whipped his head up and glared at me.
Do ya think you'd be here if it was a joke? I held up my hands. Fine, it's not a joke, but how does Pigman fit into this? And why are the girls still here? Latro frowned and held up her bare left wrist.
Nick planted the coins in exchange for the gold O'Flanagan would get. She whipped her head to the leprechaun and glared at him.
And we're still here because there's no way in hell any of us are going to kiss him. I arched an eyebrow. He hasn't tried kissing you guys.
O'Flanagan's shoulders fell.
I have, but it won't work if they're not willing. And we're not willing because you haven't proven that you can get us back home at all, Latro snapped.
He balled his hands into fists and stomped his black boot against the ground.
I can, but it can't be done just any time.
You have to wait for tar water to be turned on.
Prove it, she insisted. Not until ya kiss me, he countered. I held up my hands. Wait a sec.
Why is it so bad that he's stuck in his own home world? O'Flanagan frowned. Because I can't be making more of me fortune, unless I have a way to get to tar human world. Without that way I'm a laughing stock here. By this time a small group of human women had emerged from the woods. From their modern nightclub-esque clothes, I ventured to guess they were the half-dozen missing girls. One of the larger ones shook her fist at O'Flanagan.
You little weasel. Let us go home. The cries of her fellow captives answered her. Yeah. Let us go.
O'Flanagan raised his arms over his head.
Fine, I'll admit it.
He dropped his arms to his side and hung his head.
I can't get any of y'all back. Their eyes widened. Latro stepped to the forefront and glared at him. Then you did lie to us.
The little man held up his hands and took a step back.
I didn't know until tar first one come trough, honest. Why can't they go back?
I questioned him.
He pointed at himself.
Because when I brought Tem here, tar curse fell on them as well.
They are stuck here until I'm free. I held up my coin and his hair. I can't even take them back. He shook his head. You can try, but it'd probably do ya no good. I glanced at Latro. You willing to try? She nodded. I am.
The other women crowded close to us and grasped my arms.
Their pleading words and faces pained me. Please take me. And me. I want to go home. I pursed my lips. This might not be safe to try, so we'll just try Latro.
If it works, we'll come back for you.
At the threat of danger, they dropped their pleas. I glanced at O'Flanagan. How do I go back?
He nodded at the hair and coin.
Hold them up and brush them together. If Taro Tier 1 wants to go, she's got to hold on to you. I looked to Latro. The water in the bathroom should still be running.
Ready to go.
Latro grasped my arm and nodded.
I raised the coin and hair into the air and brushed them together. The familiar tug pulled at my hands, but there was also a tug from Latro's hand.
Latro stood there as still as a board, but as heavy as a truck. The two competing directions strained my hands and arm.
My muscles screamed at one of them to win. I pulled my hands down and gasped. My feet wavered under me, and I would have fallen if Latro hadn't caught me. She helped me onto the grass and knelt beside me.
What's wrong? What happened?
O'Flanagan stepped up to us and shook his head.
She couldn't take you with her, that's what happened.
I lifted my head and pursed my lips as I studied his little frame.
What if one of these women aren't your true love? He sighed and shrugged. 10 I got to keep trying.
I glanced around at the disappointed, frightened faces of the women and Latro.
You guys got a choice.
Either kiss him and hope he turns into a prince, or stay here forever. The women glanced at one another.
Latro straightened and pursed her lips. Fine. I'll go first.
O'Flanagan's face brightened with a smile. He clapped his hands and did a little jig close beside Latro.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Give a little kiss, Tar. She grabbed his lips and held him still.
What guarantee do we have that any of these women will be your true love? She questioned him.
He pulled himself from her grasp and rubbed his lips. A scowl graced his face.
I can't take just anybody, you know.
Tara's rules.
They've got to have some magic in them to get over here, and he winked. They can't be too ugly for us. Latro curled her lips back in a snarl of disgust. Don't get any ideas, Munchkin. He frowned and crossed his arms. Don't think it is any good for me either. Latro nodded her head at him. Close your eyes.
O'Flanagan narrowed them, but they didn't shut.
Why?
Because I'm not having you do anything weird to me. Now shut them, she ordered him. He pursed his lips but shut his eyes.
Latro grabbed him by the collar and pulled him into a kiss.
The other women and I cringed. The kiss was blissfully short as Latro broke them apart and shoved him away.
Her scowl was still in place, but there was a gleeful smile on his lips. He slapped his hand against his knee and let out a laugh. You're not a bad kisser, he complimented her.
She stood and wiped her mouth with her sleeve.
And your breath smells like pipe smoke. He wagged his eyebrows. Maybe we might try again and see what flavor I might be now. Did it work or not? One of the girls spoke up. Latro narrowed her eyes at O'Flanagan. Well,
did it? O'Flanagan's grin widened. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A brilliant white light surrounded us, and I felt the familiar tug of the portal, as we were all sucked into the stream. The trip landed all of us on the tiled floor of the women's bathroom at Knockney's Nick's joint. We were back. 11. The girls looked around themselves in bewilderment, but Latro and I climbed to our feet. O'Flanagan sat on the counter and swung his legs over the edge. A wide grin still graced his lips as he gestured to our surroundings.
Was that a good enough answer for you?
Any reply was interrupted by a crash, as the bathroom door was torn off its hinges. The women screamed as David flew through the frame. He was still transformed and covered in blood. I couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. His yellow eyes swept over us. The formerly kidnapped women let out some high falsetto screams that made me wince. O'Flanagan clapped one hand over his ear and glared at them.
Enough of that, my dears.
The little man waved his other hand at them. A white mist floated from his wiggling fingers and fell over the tightly packed group of terrified women. Their eyes rolled back in their heads and they slumped to the floor. The leprechaun grinned.
They'll sleep all night and won't remember a ting from our little adventure. Latro took a step back from David and glared at him. This adventure isn't over yet.
I stood and stepped between the hunter and the hunted.
I'll deal with him. Latro pursed her lips. You'd better, or his bloodlust will kill us all. I turned my attention to David.
His eyes fell on me and lit up. I approached him with my arms outstretched and my palms up.
Hey, David. You know me.
His eyes narrowed and his lips curled back in a snarl.
I swallowed hard but didn't stop my approach. It's your mate, remember?
You haven't forgotten me already, have you? You gave me your mother's necklace today. See? I pulled out the necklace I'd kept hidden in my shirt all night. O'Flanagan jumped to his feet and his eyes bulged out of his head.
Well, I'll be a saint.
David blinked. The color of his eyes changed from yellow to their usual dark color. His height shrank and his clothes hung loose on his body. I rushed over and leapt into his arms just as he returned to normal. He wrapped his arms around me and smelled my hair. His soft words brushed against my ear and sent a thrilling tingle through me.
My beautiful, wonderful mate. You never cease to amaze me.
I pulled us to arm's length and scowled at him.
And you never cease to scare me half to death.
I nodded at the blood on his mangled shirt and pants.
Is that yours?
He chuckled and his eyes twinkled.
Let's just say I'm not very kosher right now, and the dear proprietor is going to need a few dozen stitches. You promised me you weren't going to transform again, Latro spoke up.
We turned to find her standing with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. Close beside her stood O'Flanagan with his bulging eyes stuck on my necklace. David sheepishly smiled and shrugged.
The pigman wasn't taking no for an answer, so I had to show him no. Latro pursed her lips, but dropped her arms to her sides. I'll let it slide this time, monster, but only because the women got back.
When I leave this place, we're going to be enemies again. Got it? O'Flanagan snatched her hand and leaned towards her with a sly smile on his lips.
Now where do you think you're going?
She yanked her hand free and glared at him.
To my home for a long hot shower.
He chuckled and tapped the side of his nose.
Aren't you forgetting, Somitten? And a long rest, she added.
He opened his arms and smiled at her.
But my love, you're coming home with me. Latro's eyes widened. She stepped back and sneered at him. I'm not your love, and like hell I am. He wagged his finger at her. There's no denying it, my lovely.
You broke the spell, and tar home you're going with me.
Latro, I called. She turned to me with a horrified look on her face. I tossed the coin and hair to her. You might be needing these.
She caught them just as O'Flanagan leapt at her. He pulled her hand down close to the sink and turned on the faucet. A burst of light spread over them. The last I saw of either of them was Latro's twisted expression of horror as she was sucked into the water by her one true love. David blinked at the faucet and glanced down at me.
Mind explaining what that was about?
I leaned my head against his chest and smiled at the running water.
Just true love, my mate. Just true love.